Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judith Spencer from the General Services Administration, Office of Government-Wide Policy. And I'm here with Mary and John today to talk to you about identity. And that's the title of our little section here. And it's kind of a big area as we're coming to learn. And so each of us is going to give you just a slightly different perspective on identity. And I'm going to speak first about the government perspective. John is going to talk about his perspective, I guess how to make this work for everyone, is what I think I heard. And then Mary is going to finish up the talk. And we're hoping that we leave a little time at the end for questions, if anything that we say here actually causes you to think about those kinds of things. So when I think about Gov 2.0 and I think about the open solutions area, the area that actually comes to mind is the 300 million Americans, any number of whom may want to do business with the government at all times of the day and night. And we don't actually know who will want to do business, what kind of business they want to do, or when. And there's 300 million of them. And identity is a real problem for us because for most of the interactions that the government has with the public, we actually do need some level of identity assurance. And so this has been something we have been struggling with probably since the early part of the century. We did some good work early on. We laid down some policy bases that we could build from. One of these was the e-authentication guidance for federal agencies, which defined 4 levels of assurance, everything from no real knowledge or confidence in the real-world identity, all the way up to full knowledge and confidence in the real-world identity, and then several levels in between. And that guidance, which was established and promulgated by the Office of Management and Budget, was then followed by some guidance from the National Institutes of Standards and Technology that actually defined technical parameters for each of these levels of assurance. And these included not just actual technology solutions, but then also the degree of identity verification one would need to do in order to trust an identity to a certain level of assurance. So this work has actually been around since around 2003. And we've made some great strides. Everybody has heard about HSPD 12 and the new federal identity card, which actually, again, grew out of that work. And we've made some inroads with working with business and working with other governments. But we continue to be stymied by 300 million Americans. It's just a huge set of people. Well, we think we're making some real progress here now. The new administration's emphasis on transparency and open government has led us to start looking at some of these open solutions and looking at how we can actually leverage those in order to do business with the American public. Because these people are doing things online today, and they're quite comfortable doing them. A lot of people have MySpace accounts. They have Facebook accounts. They do business using PayPal. They have Google accounts, they do Gmail, they have Yahoo, they have AOL. So as far as a social networking, people are very active in this space. And what these people have that they may not even realize they have is they have something called OpenID. Or they may have something that's similar to that, what we call open identity solutions. And these are, what has happened is industry has gotten together and they've developed these standards, and with these standards, they have actually created an interoperable solution for logging on and asserting your identity at different, well, in this case, at fairly low levels of assurance, but still being able to create a web presence, a whatever you will, my Facebook, my space, that is unique to them. And so that when they come back, they're recognized again and they're brought back to the same place that they were with the same web experience that they were looking for. So this is something that we think that we can leverage. So we have been working with both the OpenID Foundation and the InfoCard Foundation to try and bring these solutions to the government so that we can actually start an environment where we can have a dialogue with the American people starting at these lower levels of assurance, we won't necessarily know the individual we're doing business with, but we can create for them a pick your agency, pick your federal website experience that they can then get used to using and be able to have, we hope, a richer experience in doing online interactions with the federal government, and make that our starting point from where we can grow new and more complex services that will in fact require some identity solutions. Now what we have done is we've identified 6 privacy principles to help us along this way. They are that individuals must be able to opt in. This mustn't be a requirement. That we're only going to exchange a minimal amount of information that is needed for the particular activity that they're pursuing. That there's no activity tracking, there's no use of personal information for other things. That individuals get adequate notice. That it's not compulsory. They can, in fact, choose a different solution. And that if a service is terminated, their data still remains protected. So these are some of the things that we are doing. And what we believe is that by starting here, we'll be able to grow this service and into more richer and capable areas of doing business with government. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Well, I have a difficult introduction of making, with Dick's introduction of trying to solve everyone's problems. I'm not going to try to do that. What I am going to try to do is talk about identity as an open platform and the importance of that, and put this in somewhat of a context. About 5 years ago at the Berkman Center, which was then at the Harvard Law School, we organized a group of people, it's very grassroots, to look at the issue of user-centric identity, to what it meant for people to have control over information about themselves. And we felt that that was an extremely important principle, not just from the point of view of technology, but actually in making technical decisions, we're actually implicitly developing new kinds of institutions and new kind of legal frameworks. And so when one thinks about the role of identity, it is not just a technology, it is a layer of new kinds of social institutions, new kind of legal frameworks, and therefore we have to be very, very careful about them. What was so interesting about this whole initiative is that it really started as a grassroots effort. And it involved lots of different parties. There's something called Project Higgins, a number of us involved in, and then it's morphed into the iCard Foundation. One of the things that Vin Cerf mentioned yesterday was saying, when he was asked what he would do differently, he said, oops, we forgot the authentication layer. It's a big oops. And I think now we have to, at a point of having to sort of retrofit a layer. I'm not going to call it identity layer. Identity is getting a bad name these days. So, but just say an authentication layer, because it's so essential, particularly when we talk about Gov 2.0, to think about the relationship of trust of people they have in their government, plus what the government can trust about their citizens. If you get that wrong, then you completely disrupt a very primary sort of set of relationships on which you cannot build other sets of services. So if you make an assertion about who you are and you're logging into a government site, they have to know, particularly if it's sensitive information, that you're not a terrorist. You're not someone who is a bad actor. So there's some kind of credential they're going to need. Likewise, as a citizen, you're going to need to know that the government, in turn, is not going to use this for surveillance. And so there's this very primal kind of relationship that underlies any kind of citizen engagement and participation. Now, what Vivek talked earlier about is a very simple sort of level 1 kind of engagement, where it's a matter of convenience. I think increasingly, the more important the transaction, the more important the services are, the more important you're going to have the ability to have to authenticate certain attributes about people. My own belief is that you're going to have some vehicle whereby you can have authenticated anonymity. In other words, you can authenticate that this person that has a right to be on a site, but you cannot easily track information about them. You can penetrate that anonymity with the appropriate kind of warrants. And so you have a legal framework that basically says that you can collect information, but it's not personally identifying information. If there's probable cause, then you have a vehicle by which to then to identify or de-anonymize someone. There's technology out there that allows you, so you-proof technology, zero-knowledge proof technology, it's very powerful, that allows you to assert prove a secret without having to reveal it. There are all these little technologies, when taken together, I think can create a very viable, open, interoperable ways in which people can interact with the government, and government agencies can interact among themselves. But I think it's not something that's going to be done within a traditional government framework. I think there are new kinds of institutional arrangements that are required. And you heard Casey Coleman making those, saying there was a variety of ways of thinking about that, and particularly if you look at identity as being something that's a service that comes out of a cloud. I think that's the model that's going forward. I think that one needs to move away from, in my view, from certain kind of NIST standards to recognize it's a question of managing risk, and that you have different kinds of risk associated with different kinds of transactions. You have different levels of authentication based upon the potential damages that can result from the misuse or revealing of that information. But there's a whole new kind of architecture that needs to be thought out, and naturally these things evolve. But I think there's going to be a private sector role in a new kind of open governance kind of relationships that we haven't seen before. And I think just right now, this conference, that we are just the beginning of sort of exploring what those are going to be. So I'll leave it at that.
Mary?
Thank you, Judy. It's a pleasure to be here at this historic event talking about platforms for open government. Judy and I have been working closely together on this trust framework with a myriad of other organizations. And I know John from my work on Higgins, which is an open source identity management system that includes an open source implementation of information cards IMI protocol standard. We've heard today how important identity is to government platforms. And historically, identity has been handled in so many different silos. And as more and more systems come online, it just didn't scale to keep creating more silos. So there's a better way, an open trust framework using open digital technologies. There was a time when we were concerned that government would solve this problem by creating a big brother single identity system for all. But the good news is instead, we've been working in a public-private partnership that's going to provide the public choice in identity protocols and in identity credentials. Yesterday, the Open ID Foundation and the Information Card Foundation announced that there were 10 industry identity providers that were stepping forward to participate in the public pilots that we're organizing with the government. These are big companies whose names you recognize, as well as small little innovative companies. There's Google, Yahoo, PayPal, Equifax, Axiom, VeriSign, AOL, Citigroup, Privo, and Wave Systems, who will be offering identities which can be simple anonymous things like your Google Mickey Mouse 123, when, as John says, you need to be the same person, but you want to be pseudonymous, as we call it. Or when you're doing higher value transactions, you can go to your trusted organization who's already handling some of your financial transactions. The initial pilot that's been announced is at the National Institutes of Health and its related agencies, and I do want to pause and thank NIH for going first and being the first to benefit from these things. We know it's hard to go first.
That's right.
The initial pilot is for level of assurance 1, the lower level of assurance. It's important to walk before you run and have everybody get comfortable with what you're doing. But it's also very important to emphasize that we've been planning and looking at this from a point of view of the range of the multiple levels of assurance that Judy discussed. And so, for example, the information card profiles that have been defined as part of Judy's ICAM process are for levels of assurance 1, 2, and 3. So the highest types of transactions that a public citizen might need to do with the government will be handled by these. And I, again, because of this audience and its historic roots, want to emphasize that both open IDs and information cards, which are open digital technologies, are based on open protocols, and there are open source implementations for both of these. So I think we finally, after lots and lots of work, have gotten to a place where we have a way forward that is balancing privacy, openness, and efficiency.
Right, thank you, Mary. So with that, we thought we would open it up and see if there were any questions from the floor concerning this work or identity or something that we didn't address that you wished that we had. Yes, if you have a question, could you stand up? Oh, that's better.
Hard to see.
Ah.
Yes.
Bobby Browning from GovDelivery. I just wanted to ask you which institute at NIH is doing the pilot?
It's the National Library of Medicine, and it's about being able to access medical publications.
Hi, Nick Vitellari from Engineera. You know, it's interesting and very gratifying to see what's being accomplished. It's great to see the open ID and the iCard elements going on. I thought maybe I'd ask you a speculative question, because one of the issues, as you know, with identity information is now we've got identity information all over the place. And it's not just under the province of government, it's under the province of private corporations. We've got machines on a 7x24 basis continually searching all of our net behavior and other types of behavior. And so just thought I'd ask your opinion on how you're thinking about that.
Well, I'll go first. I'm sure John has an opinion on this. But from the standpoint of the government, that is one of the reasons why, as we've moved forward on this work that we've been doing with OpenID and InfoCard, we have brought in the privacy community, both internal to government and also external, to discuss with them what we're doing. And we developed these 6 privacy principles that, of course, we are going to obviously adhere to, but we also want our partners to pay attention to those as well. John?
I mean, that's a huge problem. And I think that, you know, once the information escapes, it's hard to get it back. And so there's, with webcams and other kind of devices, you're collecting information of people all the time. I think that recognition of that, we're really going to have technology and legal frameworks and policy frameworks by which we can differentiate between different kind of consequential damages associated with different kinds of information. And we're going to need to develop not just policies, but mechanisms and principles that enforce those. Nothing's going to be perfect on this. But I think you're going to set certain precedents and expectations of what is sort of good behavior. I think there's some very interesting possibilities in creating secure repositories. This is something I'm very interested in. That can anonymize, be blindly, you can have a sort of a blind stewardship of the data. And so you can mix it up, do lots of different things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be personal identifying. And parties will agree to those sets of conventions, and that will be a way of branding different kinds of services as it becomes important. And there'll be a variety of choices around this. But it's not a perfect solution by any means.
Yes, work to be done. We are over time.
I had a question about identity theft, and when somebody else takes over your identity, and what have you been thinking about that? And that goes to the legal frameworks and things. With a credit card report, you'd be able to look at what has been happening, and so have you thought about that?
It is always on our mind. I mean, it's one of the things that we recognize as being the thing we have to protect against. So when we talk about the privacy principles, when John talks about keeping information anonymous as much as possible, minimalization, only collecting what you need, only holding what you need, only sharing what needs to be shared. So we are over time, so we need to close it off right now. and we thank you for your attention.
Thank you.